Dr. Yaron is chairman of the board of the Ayn Rand Institute, and he is here for a few days. We will have him. We will have events with him here in David Game College for the next 3 days. Tomorrow, he will be broadcasting the Yaron Brook Show live from here. And then Friday, we have the Free Market Roadshow with 2 panels. Yaron will be on both of them, and several speakers, and a planned protest outside, so it definitely will be interesting. But yeah, without further ado, let us get to tonight's topic of President Trump, and please join me in welcoming Yaron Brook.
Thank you. So you think that's working or no?
It's working when you press the button, and then it sometimes stops.
So red light means it's not working. All right. There.
Yes, but
1, 2, 3. All right. I hope there's a protest. I was telling Rosie, protest. One, two. There we go. All right. Click this on, so we have to hold one thing. All right, so here's the thing. I don't really want to talk about Donald Trump. He bores me. I've talked about him for 5 frigging years. I haven't convinced anybody, I don't think. If you guys want me to talk about Donald Trump, if that's why you came, I will do it. But otherwise, I'm pretty much open to talking about anything else other than him. But if there's even one person who came because they wanted to hear me talk about Donald Trump, I will do it. So don't be embarrassed. Anybody want me to talk about Donald Trump? All right, so we've got 3. Thanks, Rosie. So let me start, before talking about him, let me give you some context, because I think context is everything in politics. I think both political parties in the United States, I think the technical term is suck. They are terrible, they're unprincipled, they don't stand for anything good. Neither one of the parties stand for anything good. In general, the Republican Party on economic issues is moderately better than the Democratic Party on economic issues. And that's good, because we care about economic issues, we care about economic freedom. The Republican Party is moderately better on economic issues. They're not better on individual rights, necessarily. They're not better at limited government, necessarily. But they're better on economic freedom. They generally, and I hesitate to say this because some Republican presidents have been so awful, they generally reduce regulations, they generally reduce taxes, they generally have a more hands-off approach to the economy than do Democrats. They're not, by any means, the party of laissez-faire capitalism. They're not, by any means, the party of individual rights. They're not, by any means, the party of economic freedom and economic liberty. They're just mildly better than the Democrats, at least the mainstream Democrats. Now, the progressive wing of the Democratic Party is pure socialist, or worse. Some of them are pure nihilists, and they're truly horrific. So in that case, the Republicans are much better than the Democrats. Still pretty bad, but much better than the Democrats. And that's important to hold that in context, that I do understand and believe that the Republicans, on economic issues in particular, and maybe today even on free speech issues, are better than the Democrats. But here's the thing, or at least were better than the Democrats, we'll get to. Republicans, when they're in power, almost never live up to any of that. The Republican Party is good primarily, its value primarily, is in slowing down the Democrats' march towards statism and socialism, or fascism. The real strength of the Republican Party, in my view, is as an opposition party. Is it a party that stops the Democrats? I miss Bill Clinton's years, his last 6 in particular. Why? Because he did nothing. And that's good. Because anything they do is almost always horrific. In his last 6 years as president, Bill Clinton had a Republican Congress. So the Congress basically vetoed anything bad he wanted to do. And he did a couple of good things. He did welfare reform, which is not great, but it's decent. And he did it because he wanted to have some achievement. So he appeased the Republicans, which is very unusual, usually to Republicans appeasing the Democrats, and cut a deal around welfare reform that actually turned out to be pretty good for the United States of America. Right? But once Bush came into power and had a Republican Senate and had a Republican House of Representatives, what did we do? The United States engaged in 2 wars where the president himself admitted they were not going to win. He called the wars unwinnable wars. It's why one of my books, or a book I have contributed to, is called Winning the Unwinnable War. It took that from Bush saying it was unwinnable. They raised government spending. Basically, I think they tripled government spending during the 8 years of George Bush. Tripled government spending. They cut taxes. Yay, Republicans cut taxes. But then if you spend it all, and you spend much more, you're borrowing the money, the economic effects are almost the same because you're sucking money out of the private economy one way or the other. So what's the point of cutting taxes if you're going to spend even more? We passed the largest restructuring of the American government, not by reducing its size, but by increasing, by forming Homeland Security, and by basically passing a Patriot Act that monitors all of our lives. NSA, hello. I know they're listening. And created the TSA. If you've been to America, you've experienced the TSA. I mean, you have a similar thing here in the UK, and they do now all over the world. Little fascists who, pat down little girls because they might be terrorists. And God forbid we profile people to decide who might be terrorists, who might not be terrorists. No, we assume we're all terrorists, and randomly we're going to pat you down, even though clearly it's kind of obvious you're not going to blow up the plane. What else did we get? Larger government. Sarbanes-Oxley, I forgot. You guys don't know what Sarbanes-Oxley is, but it's a full employment act for accountants and lawyers. That's all you have to know about it. It's the largest expansion of the regulatory state since Nixon, another Republican. That was George Bush, 8 years. Did wonders for America, moving us away from statism, accelerated our path to statism. And then, when we had a financial crisis, he said in order to save capitalism from itself, we had to abolish it for a while. And we got the largest bailouts in American history, maybe in world history. $700 billion to bail out the entire banking system. They didn't need a bailout, but we bailed out them anyway. $700 billion, a blank check from Congress. All Republican, House and Senate, and by then maybe the House had been lost, but Republican president, and what did we get? We got one of the largest expansions of governments in American history under Bush. And of course, his real gift to all of us is that he was so awful that we got Obama afterwards. So we got somebody even worse as president. We got Obamacare, and we got all kinds of other stuff, while Obama, for a little period of time, had a Democratic House and Senate. But he lost the Democratic House and Senate. And then Obama had divided government again, and Republicans were in the opposition. And they were pretty good. They stopped Obama from pretty much doing anything in the last 6 years of his presidency. He didn't do much. So I want, right, in the world we live in today, not in my ideal world, in the world we live in today, All I want is a Republican Party who opposes the Democrats on key issues related to economic freedom, because that's where the Democrats are going to attack most vigorously, and we're seeing Biden do it right now, right? Try to destroy economic freedom in America. I want a Republican Party that's robust. Maybe my biggest reason for opposing Donald Trump is that I think he has destroyed the ability of the Republican Party to be that, to be an opposition party. He's basically repositioned the Republican Party to be a party of big government, to be a statist political party, to be a political party that believes in central planning, that believes in trade restrictions, that believes in building walls, that believes in restricting economic activity, that believes that you call up CEOs and you tell them where they can and cannot build plants, what they can and cannot do, that believes in government spending with no controls. Trump had a Republican House and a Republican Senate, and what was the consequence? Government spending went through the roof. There's no discipline, zero. Yes, at the margins, there was a little bit of deregulation at the agency level, none through the legislature. Obamacare, which is kind of what people hated the most about Obama, was Obamacare. And that every Republican has ever sworn to repeal Obamacare. Did Trump repeal Obamacare? No. Now, you could blame Congress on that, but how much time did Trump actually spend actually lobbying Congress, actually twisting arms on Congress as a president is supposed to do to get it passed? Almost none. Why? Because Trump never wanted to repeal Obamacare, because Trump, on a number of occasions, expressed sympathy towards the NHS, not the NHS, the Australian equivalent of the NHS, towards universal health care, towards socialized medicine. He is not a believer in private health care. He doesn't really want to, and he didn't want to repeal Obamacare because he didn't know what would replace it. He had no clue what he would do with the economic fallout of Obamacare going down. See, there was no lobbying, there was no attempt, there was no fireside chat with the American people, there was no speeches and fiery rhetoric about the need to destroy socialized medicine because he doesn't believe it. And without that, the Republican Party just folded, and they never repealed Obamacare. They spent like crazy, didn't repeal the one law that they promised to repeal. I'm not even talking about did they repeal Dodd-Frank, the other achievement of the Obama era, because nobody expected them to do that. But they didn't repeal Dodd-Frank. They didn't repeal Sarbanes-Oxley. They didn't repeal Obamacare. They didn't repeal any law that regulates business. They lived up to the reputation of Republicans. They cut taxes and spent like there was no tomorrow. But worse than that is that Trump, in his rhetoric, in everything that he stands for, is not a believer in free markets. Not even symbolically, not even as a reference. You know, George Bush claimed at least to be a capitalist. But Trump never claimed that. Trump's a crony, always has been a crony. He loves cronyism because that means that when he's president, all these big shot corporate leaders come to him to ask for favors, and he loves to be in that position. He, basically represented the stereotype of a crony businessman, and he governed like a crony businessman. Right? Tariffs on China. All right, people hate China. Fine, we'll have tariffs on China, okay? Oh, but the farmers are hurting. So we'll give subsidies to the farmers and make them quiet. And then who else is hurting? Okay, we'll give you a tariff, we'll give you a subsidy, we'll give you a subsidy. We'll hand out the checks. Why? Because I did something stupid like tariffs on China. But of course, if it was just tariffs on China, you would argue, oh, he's a brilliant foreign policy mind and he's trying to put pressure on China. But how does that explain tariffs on Canada, on Brazil, on the European Union? Our allies, supposedly at least? Why do we have tariffs on them? This is not about China. This is about mercantilism. This is about a mercantilist mentality, which is what Trump represents. And what Trump is now entrenched into the Republican Party. The entire Republican Party now is mercantilist. The voices of the few free traders have been silenced. It's not sexy, it's not popular anymore as a Republican to stand for free trade. So there's no advocacy for economic liberty or economic freedom because that's not Trumpism. Indeed, the rising wing among intellectuals within the Republican Party, within conservatives, is not the laissez-faire wing, it's the what are called national conservatives. You can look them up. They're doing a big conference next month in Washington, D.C. And the national conservatives, you will hear talks about industrial planning from Republicans. You'll hear talks about we have to be self-sufficient. We have to stop this idea of free trade, not just with China, but generally. We don't believe in it. We have to have managed trade. And managed trade means what? It means subsidizing, it means promoting, it means local businesses, because some businesses will suffer and you'll have to help them out, just like Trump did with the farmers. We need common good conservatism for the judiciary. Forget about the Constitution. The Constitution is irrelevant. It's no accident that Trump never mentioned the Constitution, never mentioned individual rights. He has no clue what they are. I promise you he's never read them, and he has no understanding of them. Now, I don't think the Supreme Court has an understanding of them either, but at least they pretend to. Trump never pretended to. He doesn't care. He just doesn't care. It's whatever Trump wants, whatever will get him reelected, whatever you guys, you know, whatever the crowd in the audience. I mean, he's going to be very anti-vaccine soon because he gets booed every time he tells the audience to get vaccinated. He's going to change his position on vaccines because he doesn't like to get booed. So, on no front did Trump actually represent any of the moderate pro-free market values that Republicans traditionally have, and I think by doing that has emptied them, has denied us a Republican Party in the future that will be in opposition to anything the Democrats do. And you can see it right now. There was a stimulus bill that was passed. The first thing that Biden did, he passed a stimulus bill. I forget the size of it, but it was somewhere close to $2 trillion. Republicans said nothing. They voted against it, but they didn't argue for it. There was no debate. There was no public outcry. They don't care about these things. They've learned that the American people don't mind statism when it comes to economics. They care about woke, and they should care about woke. It's good to care about woke. They care about the cultural stuff. But on economics, they do not stand up for economic freedom. And the test of this was when Biden was proposing the stimulus bill, you know, the one that passed in January, I think, or February, in February. He was proposing $1,600 checks to all Americans as part of the COVID reparations, I guess you call it, right? COVID reparations. Shutting down our lives. So every American got $1,600 in the mail, every American making less than a certain amount. Trump was outraged. I said it should be 2,000, Trump said, not 1,600. Republicans were criticizing Biden for not sending Americans more money. Why? Because that's the standard that Trump has set. Appease the people. It's populism, right? Whatever the people want. The people want more money. Give them more money. So, in my view, the Republican Party is dead as an opposition party. You'll see it with Biden now. You saw with the infrastructure bill, this ridiculous infrastructure bill that was passed with Republican support. We'll see what happens with the $3.5 trillion budget that Biden is proposing, whether Republicans stand up to it or not. Remember, most of Trump's presidency, he said, I want an infrastructure bill. And he wanted one bigger than what Biden is proposing. And that passed the House and Senate. And by the way, here's a president who wanted an infrastructure bill, at least for 2 years had both the Senate and the House, and didn't get an infrastructure bill. So he couldn't even get what he wanted. He was so impotent with regard to legislation. So that's one. I think, you know, and I'm not going to do 10 minutes, Razi, sorry. You asked for this, you're going to get it, right? So one is, from an economic perspective, he is, in my view, eviscerated the Republican Party's ability to stand up to the Democrats. And I think we will pay a cost for that for decades to come. Indeed, the people now running for Congress under the banner of Republican are not free marketers anymore. The people who used to be free marketers cannot get elected. People like Nikki Haley, who I generally like as a Republican, who I had hoped would run for president, has no hope in the post-Trump Republican Party. She's one who defends capitalism. She doesn't do a very good job at it, but, you know, what can you do? But she was on that side, on the pro-capitalist, pro-free market side. And she has no hope in the Republican Party today. She's finished. And I think you'll see the candidates who are best at promoting economic liberty will be the ones who cannot pass muster, who won't win elections, who won't even win the primaries in the Republican Party. The Republican base will not vote for them, because Trump has conditioned them that that is not important. The only thing that matters is the cultural battles, the social battles, and we need this economic nationalism, which is where the Republican Party and the conservative movement today in America is, around economic nationalism. That is their motive. So that's one. Second, now, Ayn Rand in the 1960s wrote a scathing essay about JFK. And her conclusion about JFK was what made him particularly bad, evil. I mean, she thought he was one of the worst presidents ever, right, at that point. There's a part of me that is glad that she didn't live to see what we've seen in the last 20 years, 30 years, was that JFK was a pragmatist. He believed in nothing. He did what was expedient in the moment. He did what would get him elected ultimately, or what would appease people, or whatever worked. But he believed in nothing. As compared to Donald Trump, JFK was an unbelievable idealist. I mean, Donald Trump is a caricature, not a caricature, the stereotype of a committed pragmatist. Now, what does pragmatism mean? Pragmatism doesn't mean being practical. It doesn't mean getting things done. Pragmatism means that you don't believe in principles. It means that you only think short term, and thinking is not the right word there, that you only plan, that you only do for short-term effects, that you ignore the long term, that you don't think in terms of the long term. You don't think rationally. You emote and you consider just what will happen next, not what will happen ultimately. Pragmatists don't care about the truth. Reality doesn't matter to them. Because if lying will get you what you want, then what's wrong with lying? It got me what I want. All that matters is getting what you want in the short run. And we know lying can get you what you want in the short run. At a price. What's the price? The long run. The price is the long run. Trump is exactly that. The truth, it's not that he lies. Everybody lies. At least everybody in politics lies. They're all liars. It's that Trump is the first president I've ever seen who doesn't care about the truth. The truth is not a thing. It's not in cognition. It's not relevant. It's what do I do to get what I want? He once even said it. I can't remember what the context was, but he was being interviewed, and he had said something a few days earlier that was blatantly false, right? That was just not true. And the reporter called him on it, and he said, you know, this wasn't true. And he said, what's the difference? It worked, right? He literally said that. That's a pragmatist. If it works, it doesn't matter if it's truth or lie. So Donald Trump has taken pragmatism to a whole new level in terms of his disregard for the truth, and it was from day one. I don't know if you guys remember, and I don't know if it was even covered in the UK, but on the day after he was inaugurated, there was this whole issue. The press came out and said, you know, there weren't that many people at the party or in the mall in Washington, D.C., you know, to celebrate the inauguration. And he went ballistic, right, because somebody said something negative about him. It tells you a lot about a person who can't take criticism. So he had these satellite photos blown up and put all over the press room. And the satellite photos he had blown up clearly show that not a lot of people were in the inauguration. But it didn't matter. He would like, look, this is the biggest crowd ever in the inauguration. And it's like, this is an important issue, right? It's not national security here. It's not something you want to, but he was willing to lie about that just because it was an issue of reputation, just because it was an issue of his good name or whatever, right? I mean, that's how ridiculous of a human being he is. And then he went on to lie about pretty much everything. And not care about the fact that he was lying, again, as long as he got him what he wanted. I don't think he did get him what he wanted, because what's the long-term consequence? The long-term consequence is he lost. You know, people want to ignore that, but one of the reasons I'm anti-Trump is he's a loser. So the third reason is he's a loser. What do I mean by that? When Donald Trump took office, he had a majority of the House, fairly large majority. He had a majority in the Senate. For the Senate, a fairly large majority. 2 years later, he lost the House. That's a big deal. Now the Democrats can veto everything that you do. Lost the House. And 2 years after that, he lost both the presidency and the Senate, which I didn't think was possible. I did not think it was metaphysically possible for Georgia, I don't know how many people have ever been to Georgia, but Georgia to elect 2 Democrats. I didn't think it was possible for them to elect 1 to the Senate, but they elected 2 Democrats to the Senate. Why? Because of Donald Trump. There's no other way that could have happened. Now, Trump will tell you they cheated. Okay, just like they cheated in California now, so that Newsom got reinstalled. No. It's because people either thought that everybody was cheating because Donald Trump told them that, so they didn't go out to vote. That's one theory. Or they were so sick of Donald Trump, they would vote to anything against Donald Trump. But Georgia is still a Republican state. Georgia will re-elect in the future 1 or 2 Republican senators. But Trump made them lose that seat. If you remember, there were special elections. It's happened in January, not earlier, not in November, because November was indecisive, so they had to have a special election for it. No way that should have happened. Republicans today should have 51 or 52 senators, and Biden's agenda, meaningless, because they could have vetoed anything he wanted to do. Instead, because of Trump, they lost 2 seats in Georgia, thus giving Biden a 1-seat majority in the Senate. So now he can do what he wants to do. I didn't do it. The never-Trumpers didn't do it. Trump did it. Did it to himself and to the Republican Party. The last point I'll make is, and it's related a little bit to the first point. Well, let me make 2 points, because there's another important point. Trump's foreign policy has to rank as maybe the worst, among the worst in American history. His greatest achievement is becoming best friends with the murderous dictator of North Korea. Hugging him, calling him his best friend, waving even a communist flag, we think by accident, who knows, when he met with him in Singapore. The very fact that he met with this monster is a travesty. Should have never happened. You don't meet with murderous dictators. You just don't meet them. You don't sanction them. You certainly don't call them your friends. You don't try to appease them. You don't write them letters. You, at best, ignore them. Or you, at worst, ignore them. At best, you blow them up if they're a threat to you. You don't meet with them and pretend that you're buddies, that you're equals. That has diminished the view of America, I think, in the world dramatically. Add to that his friendship with Vladimir Putin, or at least the weird relationship between him and Vladimir Putin. When Putin met with Trump, Putin seemed strong, seemed confident. Trump seemed hesitant and weak. In their famous meeting, I forget where it was, Trump says, I believe Putin, not my own intelligence agencies. He literally said that. He constantly justified things that Putin did. I mean, even in the campaign, I remember this video. It's still on YouTube, so you can find it. Somebody asks him about his relationship with Putin, and they say, and Trump says, it's friendly, it's wonderful, this is great. And the guy says, yeah, but you know that Putin arranges for the assassination of journalists. And Trump says, we all kill people. That's what kind of countries do. We all kill people. In other words, moral equivalency between the United States and Russia. There's no difference. All governments are corrupt and bad. Who cares? That was before he was elected, right? His admiration for Xi. I mean, he pretended to be tough on China. But he was incredibly friendly with the dictator of China, the person taking China from moving towards freedom to moving towards authoritarianism at ever-increasing speed. Trump was friendly with the guy. He mentioned once that, Xi's people show him a huge amount of respect. He wishes Americans would show him that kind of respect. Yeah, I mean, why do they show Xi respect? Because they fear the hell out of him because he could send them to the concentration camps. That's the kind of guy that's the kind of respect you want your people to hold to you. Again, that mentality of admiring dictators, Erdogan, Putin, Xi, anybody in the world who showed strength, the strength of authoritarianism. Donald Trump was friendly towards them and respectful of them. Our allies, not so much. Maybe with the exception, the only foreign policy success in my book that Trump had was towards Israel. He had the right policy towards Israel, partially by accident because some of the people around him were very pro-Israel. But he had a positive policy towards Israel. I don't think that's good for Israel because I think having that policy associated with Trump probably hurts Israel long term. But that's the one thing he did well. His first foreign trip, do you remember where he went? The first foreign trip he went when he got elected president. But do you know where he went? He went to Saudi Arabia. And he danced with the sheiks in this big party. And it was, everybody, I remember when Obama bowed to King Abdullah or whoever it was, right? Everybody freaked out. American president is bowed. Trump humiliated himself in front of all these guys, in front of the world, I think, by pretending that Saudi Arabia and the United States are just buddies, they're best friends, they're amazing together. That was the most important trip he took, right off the bat, when he first became president. So I think his foreign policy was a disaster. And maybe the most horrible thing. I mean, two things that have to be mentioned in terms of foreign policy. One is the peace deal with the Taliban. There's an organization you want to sign a peace deal with. Again, you don't negotiate with people who are committed to killing you, people who are evil. You don't negotiate with the Taliban. You either ignore them or you kill them, but you don't negotiate with them. There's no peace with the Taliban. What does that even mean? Yes, Biden is to blame for everything that happened locally in Afghanistan now. But it all started with Bush appeasing them, wanting to invite them to Camp David. He literally wanted to have a peace signing ceremony. I don't know why nobody's outraged about this other than me, right? This is one of the most outrageous things you could imagine. These are the people who made 9/11 possible, and you want to sign a peace treaty with them in Camp David. Pompeo, his Secretary of State, said that, oh, the Taliban have changed. They're going to help us fight terrorism. Do these people even know what's going on in that part of the world? Who these people are, what they represent, what their ideology is, what the fight is even about? Well, the answer is no. They have no idea, including Pompeo, who I thought was a decent guy before he got involved with Trump. And then the final, and maybe the thing that will ultimately, maybe the worst thing from a foreign policy perspective that happened under Trump, where America might have been able to do something but did nothing, was Hong Kong. People don't think about this, people don't remember this, people don't seem to care about this. But until COVID, there were Hong Kong demonstrations, and the Chinese government did nothing, basically. They stood on the sideline because they were worried. They didn't want troops in the streets. They didn't want to be seen on the internet chasing down students and shooting them. They didn't want a Tiananmen Square broadcast to the world. So they sat back. And they were a little worried about how the world would respond. But as soon as the world got distracted by COVID, they moved in. And they moved in slowly. First, they passed that law, which everybody was opposed to. Then they started, imposing their will on the judiciary and on arresting a few people, right? And what did the West do, particularly the United States? The UK said a few things a few times. The United States, silence, not a word. And every time China took another step, not a word from the United States. This tough president, President Trump, who hates China, who's going to go and really, we're really going to get China, right? Not a word as China takes over Hong Kong. Nothing. A little bit of moral standing, a little bit of calling them the evil empire, as Reagan did famously in the 1980s. Maybe the Chinese would have hesitated. Maybe they would have thought twice about it. But no, there was nothing, so they went all in. They took over Hong Kong, and it's gone. There is no Hong Kong anymore. It's finished. It's another city in China. Right? I mean, they closed down the famous anti-Chinese newspaper. They put the owner of that newspaper in jail, the entrepreneur, 70-something-year-old entrepreneur. He's in jail. They've silenced the democratic movement. They've taken the students and put them in jail. Did America offer visas to Chinese, to the Hong Kong people who were going to leave? Did they say, we'll welcome you with open arms? No. No, we don't want foreigners. No, the Brits did to some extent. The Canadians did to some extent. The United States, again, silence under Trump. I need to continue? Okay, one last one. COVID. I mean, I don't know how people can ignore this, right? U.S. intelligence agencies probably knew about COVID sometime in December of 2019. They certainly knew about it in the first couple of weeks of January. The Taiwanese, who don't trust the Chinese, were already aware of this in early 2020, in early January of 2020, and implemented strategies to control COVID in Taiwan. The Trump administration knew about this. Memos were written throughout January. Nothing was done. When the CDC finally decided under Trump to take this seriously, they screwed it up from beginning to end. They designed their own test, a test that didn't work. They refused to let the private sector design tests. They refused to let hospitals design tests. They refused to let labs design tests. It's only after their test had failed and wasn't working did they allow the private sector in to design tests. This is under a Republican administration, pro-markets. And yes, you could say, oh, well, Donald Trump is responsible. Yeah, the buck has to stop somewhere. All through this period, into March, Donald Trump is telling us, don't worry, be happy. if you really, really wanted to go away, it will. He didn't literally say that, but this is a pragmatist talking. He was saying, we have 15 cases, soon it'll go away, it's nothing, it's just gonna go away. I mean, he was saying it's gonna go away throughout the year. He was making these arguments about, it's just gonna go away, don't worry, it'll go away. How is it gonna go away? It doesn't, it's gonna go away. Right, it goes away. Right? Like an uneducated moron. I mean, to watch him talk about COVID was exactly that. Then, in March, when New York shut down and there were lockdowns, because everybody today thinks Donald Trump was anti-lockdowns. So when New York shut down and lockdowns, Donald Trump's response was, why didn't you do this sooner? It's too late now. You should have done this a week ago. He was not against lockdowns. When Georgia again, opened up, was the first state to open up after the lockdowns, Donald Trump was on television saying, it's too soon. Why are they opening up? They shouldn't be opening up. It's too soon. Every 2 weeks, he changed his mind. There was no coherent policy. There was no coherent strategy. There was no science. There was all politics, all the time. It was what Donald Trump and his administration wanted. That's what drove the science. And it was a total, unmitigated fiasco. Our individual rights were suppressed, were denied, as they were in most of the West. But that's because if the United States can't do it, why should anybody else? We basically adopted the Chinese model of lockdowns, which you did too. Trump didn't stand up against that. He didn't make a coherent case for liberty because he wouldn't know how to. Liberty is not a concept for him. I mean, the incompetence that the Trump administration exhibited during COVID, particularly in the early months, is astounding. He should have lost the election just for that. You can't re-elect somebody who's just completely blown it on a big stage with a big problem when you need leadership, and they completely blew it. Now, I could go on for hours, but I'll stop there. So those, to me, are the big issues that make it impossible to vote for somebody like that. Now, well, let me explain, because people say, but Biden's worse. Yeah, he is in a sense. In terms of the day-to-day things, he is worse. His policies are worse, the budget's going to be worse, the regulations are going to be worse. But my argument was that the only long-term hope, not tomorrow, not in a week, not in 4 years even, but the long-term hope for America is that somehow the Republicans find a spine, that somehow the Republicans rediscover their love of markets, of freedom, of liberty, of the founders, of the Constitution. And that the only way for that to happen is for Trump to lose. And I was hoping for a landslide. Because I thought, if there's a landslide, if it's a big loss, then Republicans will wake up. They'll realize this is what a mistake we made for 4 years. Okay, we're going to shape up. We're going to find, I don't know, Nikki Haley or whoever, somebody who loves the Founding Fathers, who understands the Founding Fathers, and we're going to advocate for them to be the next president, and they'll become a good opposition party, and we'll have at least better. So it would be a transformation of the Republican Party. But you know, Donald Trump is brilliant at one thing, at marketing. He's brilliant. So he was 5 steps ahead of me. Because I thought, if he loses, then the Republican Party will learn a lesson. But he thought, if I lose, I'll say I didn't lose. Because reality doesn't matter to him. Reality doesn't exist in Donald Trump's mind. I think he's convinced that he didn't lose. Because it doesn't matter what actually happened versus what he thinks happened. So he came out with this idea that I didn't lose. This election was stolen. The American people still love me. The American people will still vote for me. I am the future of the American people. So Republicans are going, oh, okay. So Trumpism is alive and well. So my strategy failed. But it's the only strategy I knew in terms of how to save the country long term. Now I'm much more pessimistic about the ability to save the country long term because I think Trumpism is destroying the Republican Party, literally destroying the Republican Party. The Democrats, they can't really win. I mean, Biden's approval ratings are going into the toilet. I mean, he's a disaster as a president. But the American people at the end of the day are going to look and say, okay, we're back to this ridiculous choice. And, you know, we'll get another 4 years of Trump, maybe. Who knows what that'll bring? Nothing good. So I get that people hate the Democrats more than they do Republicans. They will take anybody but Biden. I get that. But I think long-term, that is a mistake. I think long-term, you've got to penalize the Republicans when they go so far off the rails, off the track, with the hope that they will get better. Whether that works or not, no guarantees. By the way, just as an anecdote, in 2004, it was Bush versus Kerry. Bush versus Kerry. I voted for Kerry. My first vote ever in the U.S. was for the frigging Democrat who I hated because I hated Bush so much more. Now, Kerry lost. But just play in your mind a scenario where Kerry wins, right? The massive insurgency in Iraq gets blamed on Kerry, not on Bush, on Democrats, not on Republicans. The financial crisis gets blamed on Democrats, not on capitalist Republicans, supposedly, right? Obama never becomes president. Trump never becomes president. But the most important thing is the financial crisis doesn't get blamed on capitalism because John Kerry's in the White House. People can only think short term. They can't think about causes that are too complicated. If Kerry's in the White House, then it must be Democratic policy that caused the financial crisis. That changes the trajectory completely. So I'm actually pretty proud of my vote for Kerry in 2004, in spite of the fact that I despise the man, right? Because you have to think long term. You have to think strategically. You have to think what are going to be the long-term consequences. And, you know, the long-term consequences of Bush, we just experienced them in Afghanistan, and we've been experiencing for the last 10 years in the pathetic economic growth, the non-existent economic growth over the last 10 years. All right, I'll stop there. Thanks, guys. All right, so I had something to say about Trump. 50 minutes instead of 10.
Well, that's good. This mic will take a while to start, so I will say to people here, yeah, we will not have short debates, but we will have a Q&A on Trump, and we have about 20 minutes. And this
Well, we can have a Q&A on anything, so you can ask me about anything.
And if people want to ask questions in the super chat, either on our channel or on Yaron's channel, feel free to do so. We'll try to take them. We have about 20 minutes, so I don't know if we can, how many questions we can take. And yeah, for the people complaining that Trump was the topic, I am the person who chose that topic, and I'm happy that I did. So yeah, blame me this time. All right, any questions?
Is it working?
Yep.
Yeah, this was very depressing. I'm very sad right now. It's just like reminding me of all the that bad period. I wanted to ask you a theoretical question. If you were older, let's say you expected you had a few more years to live, and for the sake of simplicity, let's assume you don't have kids. Do you see yourself voting for Trump under the assumption that he would be better in the short term?
No, because I don't think when you get older you lose the long-term perspective, because that means you lose rationality in some sense, right? So, I mean, what about your integrity? What about the fact that you care about the world and you care about the world, the people in the world? I don't because I'm an egoist. It's not like I don't care. Just because you're younger than me, I don't care about you guys, right? This is definitely true of me, right? I mean, what Biden does is not going to affect me. It's just not. He can raise his taxes all he wants. I don't pay them, right? So, because I live in Puerto Rico. So, you know, plan your life in a way that politics minimizes its impact on you to the extent that you can. Now, but there is a point to the question. If I was a businessman, and I knew that a Biden presidency would involve massive new regulations in my business, basically he would destroy it, I would vote for Trump. Absolutely. So I'm not saying there's no context in which you can't vote for Trump. And I know people who hate the left so much, that despise the left so much, and that view the left as an existential threat right now to their very survival, that they voted for Trump. And I understand that. I don't agree, because I think they don't get that Trump makes the left worse and makes the outcome worse, not better. But I get why people voted for Trump. I get it, right? Because particularly the left over the last 2 years have been so awful that you don't want to have anything to do with them. You don't want to touch them. And I get why you can't vote for Biden. I don't know that I would have voted for Biden, right? Again, I'm Puerto Rican, so I don't get a vote. But if I had voted, I probably would have abstained, right? So I get all of that. But all I can do is present what I think is the long-term opposition to what Trump represents. I completely understand specific cases, specific people voting for Trump. And particularly if you're in business and you know, if you're in the oil business, and you know Biden's going to destroy your industry. And Trump was decent to oil. I mean, he was pretty good on energy. Not as good as he could have been and should have been, but he was decent. So, yeah, I can see somebody who's in that business voting for Trump, and I would have no problem with that. Right? So, yeah, in this world, we're going to come to different conclusions, but let's not delude ourselves in terms of why. My concern, or I think the mistake, is when people start thinking Trump was good. I can understand saying, no, I know how bad he was, I know how awful he was, I know all these things that you're saying, Yaron, but you know what? I can't afford to lose my business, and it was life or death for me. Under life or death circumstances, yeah. I mean, not real life death, but I get it. Yeah, Adam. What are you doing in London, by the way?
There was going to be a great debate here.
Yeah, so you came to London for the debate.
Anyway, but no, I was in Paris. It's a short trip, and the West End is open, and
Yeah.
Theater District in New York City, not quite yet. So.
No, London is open, as far as I can tell. Yeah.
So it's a two-part question. Do you think that the excesses of the left are in large part responsible for Trump's success in politics? And if you do, I'm sorry, it's a three-part question. Has the left come to...
I can barely do one.
Yeah. Has the left come to terms with this? And if they have not, what would it take to get them to come to terms with it?
Yes. So the first part of the question was, do I think that the left's excesses resulted in Trump getting elected? Yes, there's no question in my mind. That is, if you remember 2015, 16, not only did you get Obama and Obamacare, and just the attitude Obama had, which I think offended a lot of Americans and was steeped in a lot of the left's agenda, but you had the major discussion in the New York Times. The story that was discussed more than any others was transgender bathrooms. This was the most important issue in America, according to the New York Times, and it was discussed everywhere and debated everywhere. And the fact is, most Americans don't care, one way or the other. But what they care about is their own economic problems, their own lives, the economic frustration, the stagnation, which we've experienced now for over 10 years. All of that they care about. And when they see the elites, what they perceive as elites, the New York Times, dealing with all these issues that they don't even understand, never mind care about, but not discussing their issues. A lot of them were Democrats, turned against the left and its excesses. And of course, during Trump's time, Black Lives Matter, what Black Lives Matter turned into, it was always this, but I think revealed itself as what it was, which was really a racist organization. There was anti anything that wasn't black, anything that wasn't oppressed, or their perception of oppression, that rioted, that approved of rioting, that approved of stealing, looting. Just an organization at the end of the day, most Americans again said, not because they oppose the cause, which was supposedly about police brutality, but they don't buy the explanation, systemic racism, and they don't buy the way Black Lives Matter approached it. And then the Portland, and burning down the city, and the leftist mayor and the leftist city council not really caring, and well, they didn't burn down the city, they burned parts of downtown. But every night there was a thing going on there. I think most Americans said, this is horrible, this is not what we're about, this is not what we are. And in that sense, the fact that Donald Trump lost in 2020 says a lot, because nobody wanted to vote for the left, or very few people wanted to vote for the left. And the only reason the Democrats won is that it was Biden. And Biden's like a middle-of-the-road nobody, nothing, stands for nothing. He's not Elizabeth Warren, he's not Bernie Sanders, he's not even Obama. He's considered a center-left. Right? If the Democrats had run almost anybody else who was a real leftist, I think Trump would have won, because Americans are so disgusted by the left. The whole woke, cancel culture, it's so un-American. It so goes against the grain of the American spirit, of what Americans are like. All of this goes against that grain, and Americans won't tolerate it. This is why I'm not that afraid of the left, because I think America will rebel against that. Now, economic leftism, Americans will embrace. So nobody's going to repeal Obamacare ever again. Nobody wants to repeal the welfare state. Nobody wants to repeal Medicare, Medicaid, all of that stuff. Right? So economically, Americans are left. But culturally, they're not willing to go there to where the left has gone. The left has gone to an insane place. I mean, literally, it's nutty. Right? I'm very sympathetic to arguments against racism. I'm very sympathetic to arguments against discrimination against people X, Y, Z. I'm pro-gay marriage, pro all of that stuff. But the left is not there anymore. They're way wackier than that. They're in a position where they're basically, if you're not with them, you are an enemy, and they despise you. And if you're not the right color skin, if you're not, they're the racists. They're really the racists. And I've said this for years now. I think the real danger of the left is not what the left will do. The real danger of the left is the backlash against them. The real danger of the left is that white Americans say, you want to play race? We can play race. We're white, and we hate you guys for not being white. And that the racists on the other side, they, I think, will be much more powerful and much more influential. So I'm afraid of the backlash from the right. I've always been afraid for the backlash of the right. And I think economic nationalism is that kind of backlash. It's exactly that. And it's to some extent at least, driven by xenophobia, not just by nationalism. It's definitely a strain of xenophobia. What would it take for the left to realize it? I don't know. I think Biden knows it, but he can't stand against the principled position of the consistently leftists, right? So what's he going to say to Bernie Sanders? I agree with you in principle, but let's moderate it a little bit. Well, maybe you can say that to Bernie, and maybe Bernie would buy it, but AOC and all these others, they're not going to buy it. They've made a career off of being crazy leftists. And therefore, to them, that's their identity. That's what it's tied up with. So he's appeasing them. He's going to lose the country as a consequence. The people he appointed around him, some of them are centrists, but some of them are kind of way out in the left. When you mix those things, the centrist never wins, because the centrist has not granted to stand on, no argument to make, because they agree in principle with their more consistent. So I don't know that I think that the central left realizes this, knows it, but I think the center left right now is impotent. I'm full of optimism today. Hey. Or just yell the question and I'll repeat it. Yeah.
There we go. So we've talked a lot about things like economic freedom and the Constitution and a lot of other things in the story of America. But I think there's a key piece which is missing, a key step which is missing here. And that step to me is FDR. So FDR really, in my opinion, defines the modern American state and the modern American state apparatus, the big state.
Yeah.
And he ran on a pretty economically liberal platform, but he completely betrayed in it.
Oh, liberal in the European sense, yes, you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, in 1932, his first election, he ran on a pretty liberal platform.
Yeah.
And he completely betrayed it. Within months, he betrayed it.
Yeah. And he went on to mimic the very fascists who he ended up fighting.
Yeah.
So my question, I guess, is...
Fine, just ask it and I'll repeat it.
My question is the problem of pragmatists like Trump and of the left not a long-term issue with America?
Yes, the question is the pragmatism of Trump and really of the left as well, or at least the center left, not a long-term issue in America? And the answer is yes, absolutely it is. I think Trump, look, politics is a reflection of culture, not the other way around, right? Politics can influence the culture, but it can't change the culture's direction. It can tweak it. And I think Trump has tweaked the culture. He's made it worse on the side of pragmatism. But you see, I'm not sure that FDR was a pragmatist to that extent. FDR was committed. He was a committed statist. And I think he basically lied about his liberalism, if you will. And everybody knew what he was going to do. That's the other thing, right? So there was a massive bank runs in 1932 leading up to the election where FDR won. And the reason for the bank runs is everybody thought that FDR would confiscate all the gold in the United States. So people ran to the bank, handed in their paper and asked for gold, and they were going to bury it in their backyard. And FDR denied that he would do that over and over and over and over again, right? Throughout the election, he denied that he would confiscate the gold. What was the first thing he did when he was elected president? Declared a bank holiday, confiscated the gold. And owning gold in the United States was illegal. Owning gold in the United States was illegal from 1933 until 1971. Which is astounding, right? If you think about gold, United States, freedom, economic freedom, shocking, right? So FDR, what we've seen over the long run, and Leonard Peikoff talks about this in The Ominous Parallels, which I highly recommend reading, and of course in The Dim Hypothesis, which is also a book of Leonard Peikoff's. Both of those are worth reading, definitely worth reading. He talks about the fact that the United States has slowly become more and more and more pragmatic, less and less and less connected to the founding principles, less and less understanding of them, relating to them. And in that sense, the Enlightenment, which is the source of the principles of the French Enlightenment, the Scottish Enlightenment, the British Enlightenment, which is the source of the ideas in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of America, it was slowly dying and replaced with the ideas that ultimately led to pragmatism of the German Romantics. And the German romantics not only led to pragmatism, they also led to postmodernism, which is where the left is coming from, right? So basically, the United States has become, and is in some ways even worse than Europe, in adopting German romantic idealism, adopting the kind of Kantian Hegelian. I mean, even the nationalism today is so reminiscent of Hegel, right? The Hegel nationalism, the state is all, right? And that is rising in America, and I know you guys love Brexit, but is rising in UK too with Brexit, right? The ugly side of nationalism. This is a long-term philosophical problem. It won't be solved by any one election. All we can do in politics is buy time. Slow down the deterioration. Prevent the end from coming soon, right? I think Trump sped up the decline of America and its acceleration towards authoritarianism by at least a decade, maybe more. So, and that's the challenge that we face. How do we slow it down again? And I think the only way to slow it down again is to get a Republican Party that at least mildly represents the right ideas, at least at some level. I don't know if that can happen. Otherwise, we're subsiding to authoritarianism. There's no question.
Time for one more quick question.
In the front here.
You're talking about foreign policy and China, but the West, they were kowtowing to China for 2 decades, and it's only Trump's antagonism, really, that has changed course, trajectory, less embracing China and being quite well against this in all aspects. Isn't that a good thing, surely?
So you're saying Trump's antagonism towards China has woken us up to how evil China is? Potentially. I don't see that. I don't see any indication of that. First of all, we hate China for all the wrong reasons. We hate China because it's becoming an economic superpower. That's Trump's argument, not mine. We hate China because there's a trade imbalance. Who cares? If you know anything about economics, trade imbalances don't matter. They don't matter. We hate China because they're stealing our IP. Did we do anything about that? Did Trump change that? Did anything change? No, the European Union did. The European Union has a new deal with China to protect European IP. America doesn't. They're still stealing our IP, and nobody cares. Because Donald Trump didn't care. He was a mercantilist. He cared about the trade deficit. He cared about the trade deficit when we had it with Japan in the 1980s. He's on record as caring. And Japan wasn't a threat. Japan wasn't a bad actor. They were just bad economists. They ran a bad economy. So once in a while, a Western leader will say something about the Uyghurs in Western China being in concentration camps. Does anybody really care? I don't get a sense anybody really cares. Anybody's willing to say anything or do anything about China for it. And you saw that with Hong Kong. Nobody spoke up. I mean, Hong Kong, it's like the bastion of freedom in the world, the most economically free economy in the entire planet. And nobody stood up to defend it. Is anybody arguing, is any political leader right now going after the Chinese government for what they're doing to their high-tech industry? For the prosecution of Jack Ma? Anybody defending Jack Ma in the West? No. Because nobody cares about economic freedom. Okay? And the fact that they're regulating and disrupting big tech. I mean, the Americans are cheering. Yes, we should be like China. We should be doing that. We should be dragging, we should do what they did to Jack Ma. We should be doing to Jeff Bezos and Apple and Microsoft and all those guys, right? Or Google, right? They're jealous of China. So I just don't see it. Now, I have reasons I think there are reasons to oppose China. I think there are reasons to be antagonistic to China because they're authoritarian, because they have concentration camps, because they distort their own economy. But, distortion of their own economy primarily hurts them, not us. But on trade, I mean, hey, let's buy cheap Chinese goods. It helps us. And it helps the private sector in China mostly. And there is a private sector in China. So I see the world becoming, imposing more trade barriers, but trade is not the way you fight authoritarian regimes. It's not appropriate, and it's immoral, and it's not having the effect that we want in China. China during Trump's era, the 4 years under Trump, became more authoritarian, not less, significantly. I'd say when Trump started, there was still a lot of hope that China would head towards freedom. And by today, nobody hopes that, right? It's just a matter of sliding into greater and greater authoritarianism. So did we achieve anything? No, it looks like we achieved the opposite. It's the same with the left. The left seems to become worse under Trump, not better. Right? It seems he brings out the worst in them. He's not, because he's not a rational alternative. He's not somebody who can talk to the American people about why the left is wrong. He can just ridicule them in a way that gets your emotions going, but not your reason.
Interesting question.
Siri wanted to debate me. So no, I don't think the world is awakened to China in a healthy, positive way. And I think if anything, we view global trade much more as a zero-sum game than we used to. And partially Trump said that. He constantly referred to trade as a zero-sum game. Our losses, they gain. When we sell them stuff, when we buy stuff from China, they get our dollars. So we lost dollars. God, how stupid can you get? We got their stuff. I'll take stuff over dollars any day. But that mentality now is common. And I see it among people who used to be pro-free trade. Now they manipulate their currency. What do? What does the Fed do every day, if not manipulate the dollar? Since the financial crisis, we've been manipulating the dollar nonstop. Why is there so much interest in what the interest rate is going to be next week? Because the interest rate helps determine the value of the dollar. We manipulate the dollar all the time. Treasury secretaries talk down or talk up the dollar all the time. I'm sure you do the same for the pound. So China manipulates their currency as well. That's the nature of fiat currencies. They get manipulated. By the way, China's manipulating in the wrong direction. China's holding the yuan up. If you floated the yuan, it would go down, which would make their exports cheaper, not more expensive. So you even got the direction of how they're manipulating it wrong. But that's okay, because a lot of economists do as well. So no, not in a rational way. I wish it was, because I think there should be rational opposition to China. And it should be moral opposition, and it should be an appeal to consumers not to buy Chinese goods, and it should be an appeal to people not to support China, not to embrace China, or at least not the public sector in China, to the extent that you can separate them. And there should be moral condemnation of what they did in Hong Kong, of what they do to the Uyghurs, what they do to religious minorities, but also what they do to their businessmen. And if we had that, China would think twice about doing what they do. But they can get away with anything.
Thank you, Yaron, and thanks everybody for coming. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, Yaron is here for a few days. We have tomorrow at 6 p.m. the Yaron Brook Show will be taking place here, and on Saturday the Free Market Roadshow at 3 p.m. until 7 p.m. Both of those events are free. Ayn Rand Center UK members, we have events after the events as well, which you're all welcome to join. If you're not a member, aynrandcenter.co.uk/membership is where you can join. Thanks also to all the super chatters, and thanks to the person who said that I should resign because of the topic I chose. Career advice is always appreciated. There is no daily objective tomorrow for people on the Ayn Rand Center UK channel because we have the Yaron Brook Show live.
And I will be on TV tomorrow for 3 hours on GB News from 9 p.m. until 12 midnight. I'll be on the panel with a woman who got upset with me last time, so it should be fun. So that'll be on Mark Dolan's show on GB News tomorrow. I assume people watch it. GB News doesn't sound like it's doing very well.
Yes, and that's available on YouTube, so you can watch that anywhere. Also, for people on the Ayn Rand Center UK channel, in 40 minutes, Life on Earth with Robert Nasser. So thanks again, everybody, and see you all tomorrow.